Hey folks, and welcome to the Daily Ratings Podcast. It's a show where each week we'll sit down with Vincent Daly to get his thoughts on the latest movies he's been watching, both older films and new releases. And don't worry, there's no spoilers. Vince will give a brief review of the movie, share some thoughts, and of course, then rate the film. The Daily Ratings are always fair, honest, and most importantly, they're consistent. On today's show, Vince will be rating and reviewing Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, directed by George Ray Hill, Ruthless People by Jim Abrams, David Zucker, and Jerry Zucker, Dead Man by Jim Jarmusch. We have newly released The Deer King by Masashi Ando and Masayuki Miyagi, and Where the Crawdads Sing, directed by Olivia Newman. So stay tuned and enjoy the show. Mr. Vincent Daly, how we doing, buddy?
Tommy boy, how's it going?
It's going all right for me, man. How was your week of movies?
Week was good. I didn't expect to knock out two westerns. We had Butch Cassidy, but also Dead Man, which...
You surprised me with that one, I'll be honest.
I was just kind of wanted to watch something. I guess the news of Johnny Depp is still circling.
Still present in your brain.
Yeah. So I wanted to watch it, but I didn't expect it to be so much of a Western, and hey, I mean, if we cover two in 1 week, that ain't too bad, I enjoyed it.
It's not a bad thing at all.
Yeah,
and it's a different kind. Like, it's not like, again, on classic Western people's radar and stuff.
Absolutely.
But of course, we start with one of the biggest Westerns ever made, and such a solidly well-known movie. This is Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. This is 1969. Like I said, this is definitely a classic.
Oh, yeah.
And how does this movie hold up this many years later, though?
Yeah, I think it holds up well. I had high hopes for this one. Late 60s, early 70s is, really probably one of my favorite time periods in film. Close to a true story. Butch, played by Paul Newman, and the kid, played by Robert Redford, are on the last leg. Actually, very, very similar in tone. Well, maybe not in tone, but in subject matter to what we covered last week with Jesse James.
Yeah.
That, the Cowboys' days are done. This is actually even later. I think this is set, early 1900s, or if not, right at the turn of the century. And, they are on their last leg. This duo has to find a different life or succumb to the life of the outlaw, which is a destiny that we know plays out the same each time. The issue with that is they really know nothing else but robbing banks, and the film is a little comedic actually with it. It's more lighthearted than I thought, honestly. Not necessarily in a bad way, but felt kind of very lighthearted 60s to me.
So you were kind of expecting more gritty, intense? Or?
Yeah, or maybe just an emphasis more... I don't know, a tension between the relationship, a tension between the two of them. Instead, they're really thick as thieves, very Bonnie and Clyde style, and the tension isn't necessarily put on them that way. One heist too many causes them to pick up heat from a bank owner that I believe is actually kind of faceless for the whole movie. And he basically hires a hit squad to hunt them down. This kind of builds a paranoia between the two that haunts them like a shadow throughout the story. But what breaks up this tension is a lot of lightheartedness to it. Lightheartedness around the heists themselves, kind of the comedic bickering between Robert Redford and Paul Newman. And definitely on the Paul Newman side, he's very charismatic. He's very cracking jokes.
Hammy?
I don't know about hammy. I wouldn't necessarily call him like true cowboy. You know what I mean? So it was a different approach for it. This film, in the legacy of this film, it gets some flack from the hardcore Western fans for being, not my words, but hippie-ish. That it is a toned-down Western to create more of a lighthearted good time. And I watching in the present day, I liked it because it was quite unique for that reason. You know what I mean? If this is about finding unique experiences, I
felt... you would agree with that portrayal. Maybe not like you would say, okay, this is like hippieized, but it has a certain thing to it that does, I don't know, maybe round the rough edges off a little bit.
Yeah, it's granted it's about being outlaws, so it's right off the back. It's not trying to be a spaghetti western. It's not trying to be a John Wayne. At the same time, though, I mean, this is 7 years before Josie Wales, which we covered on the first western of this of the podcast, and I mean, I don't know. It's odd. It really feels like strictly in the 60s. You know what I mean? Even a couple of years later, you're not getting a film like this, no less a Western like this.
Right. Okay.
So, very similar theme, like I said, what we covered in Jesse James. It is the end of the era. I believe, again, don't quote me exactly. I think it is right 1900s, maybe like 1902 or something like that.
I think it's basically known that it's just early 1900s, very early 1900s,
Exactly. And of course, these are, like with most, historical figures, but also the legends and myths blur together for this. And that's, I think, a lot of the fun. If anything, studying Westerns this month, it's been a lot of the fun unpacking truth, and not that I'm going into a deep dive into the history of these individuals, but it's kind of fun seeing where films are trying to take things seriously and historical, and where they're trying to push just for the narrative or creating characters on screen.
Yeah, definitely.
It's something I don't feel happens. With, again, the not to always circle back to it, but the two sides of the coin of Wayne and Eastwood, these stories, I mean, well, maybe more so John Wayne. Maybe there's some more historical type of stories that are told with him. But
not too much. Oh, he's done so much film, so obviously you can pluck from it. But honestly, mostly, I don't know. Maybe.
Yeah.
I mean, you have things like Chisholm, who was real, but they definitely kind of did their own story on it a little bit, but that was real. I mean, he did the Alamo. I mean, there were things where he took on like actual roles, but I feel like a lot was definitely on film, for film almost.
Yeah. And maybe you want that in a Hollywood tale. For the decades that we've covered so far, I mean, Jesse James is definitely the outlier, but there's a lot of there's lack of realism. I mean, we're way before the gritty realism of the 2000s or something like that, where that would be heavily respected. That research into telling a hyper accurate story.
Yes, definitely.
So. But like I said already, these legends, these outlaws are at their last days. I think the tone is a little bit counteracted by Paul Newman here. Can't say I've seen a lot with Paul Newman. Obviously, he's a legendary actor. He's just very theatrical here. It's very charismatic. I mean, he's enjoyable to watch on screen, and he is funny when he's cracking jokes or kind of giving slick talk. But I would say it's a particular note for me because not once did I feel he was cowboy or outlaw. And if I really wanted to twist the knife, I didn't really feel like he was of the movie. He was almost a star transplanted into the movie. I mean,
it's very much like, oh, there's Paul Newman dressed as a cowboy.
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah.
Exactly. Where even someone like Robert Redford, there was almost a quietness to him.
Okay.
Obviously, that plays into the role of the Sundance Kid. He's more of the gunslinger. Butch Cassidy's more of the brains. There was a little bit of friction there for me because I enjoyed watching him, but it wasn't exactly anything true to maybe the role or true to maybe the material. I will say it's enjoyable seeing both of them on screen. In many ways, I think this dynamic, like I said already, Bonnie and Clyde. Also, this feels like a proto blueprint almost for a buddy cop film, as early as it is. Very interesting.
Definitely makes sense.
Yeah, even just watching how it's shot sometimes. Buddy Outlaw, I guess it would be the story structure. Action sequences are a real highlight for me here. The explosions and gunfights look particularly great. Explosions and gunfights. I mean, I don't know. I would have to look to a lot of action films of that late '60s era. The many heists that this film is comprised of. The script's not really concerned with the planning or getting us up to speed on the stakes of the thing. The heist is kind of They're just doing it. We almost see them, successful in the moment,
Right.
and getting it all done. And guess what? They've been accomplished.
Right,
No
right.
one can really stop them. And where in some films, I would want that detail. I would want that problem solving with the characters
Yes.
for the heist. Instead, the film kind of brushes by these heists. They're successful with it, and then it snaps to the focus of the relationship between Newman and Redford, and then as well this hit squad on their tail, which was a very enjoyable part.
Yeah, and for that reason, it probably also keeps the pacing pretty well.
Oh yeah, it's something I wanted out of it was maybe a little bit more, I don't know, substance to it. I think for how quickly we dive into these heists, they don't feel significant. You know what I mean? They don't feel like
Intense. It's not where you could have situations where you're on the edge of your seat, you're kind of just flying past them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I mean,
Good and bad, basically.
Exactly. It's definitely showing its age, I think, a little bit in a lot of areas. The final shootout, though, is top notch. And I think this film helped me kind of call heads or tails on what makes a good Western. I think it's a maybe a magic mix between the editing, actual physical cover in the scene, and then line of sight. When it comes to this scene of why those three pieces make sense, editing, of course, is quick cuts to make sure that the gunfire is snappy and explosive. I mean, it's punctuated on screen. Cover, I think, is so important because so many of these westerns, you're behind the barrel or you're shooting and bullets are ricocheting. I think it's important for the DNA of a western shootout because there is such a lethality to these bullets, you know what I mean? Medical attention isn't going to be good, so I don't think they can even take a nick of a bullet in a lot of scenarios. And then line of sight, I think, like with most action scenes, it's about the information we see as on screen. And I think this final shootout, because it is so focused around the perspective of Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid, the oppression of who they're in this gunfight with is really great. We only see certain angles of it, and there's little beats of surprises, throughout the whole shootout. I think that's the magic mix there. So maybe something we develop more. Obviously, there are plenty of westerns to still watch and plenty of shootouts. So I think that is where I'm tuning into, though, on what's, again, heads or tails on a good shootout and not. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, when you're just watching it, it sounds like it's like, oh, this was well done. This is how it should be done here.
Oh, yeah. And a great payoff too. I mean, all the action is really good in the film. Yeah.
And so was the movie like relatively? It was fine, but nothing great up until the end. Was it kind of a slow burn up until now, or
no? If anything, I enjoy a lot how the movie's shot.
Okay.
The cinematographer here is Conrad Hall. It's a very entertaining movie to watch. A lot of snaps, a lot of zooms. Again, we touched on it. Obviously, it was a '70s film, but we touched on it for The Man Who Fell to Earth. Mm-hmm. That cinematography at the time it was the Wild West. They're just kind of trying out new things. They're trying out very
absolutely.
It's not fixed camera, and they're really being adventurous with how it works here. And I think it works here because it feels modern how this film is shot specifically,
which is pretty awesome.
Oh,
I mean, 69.
Yeah,
so
absolutely. And again, I can't stress enough, though I'm maybe sounding lukewarm with this. This results in a very unique Western that, you can maybe make a lot of comparisons story-wise and structure-wise, but the feel of it is pretty great. You know what I mean? And definitely worth your time. Another interesting use on the film is the film also features kind of a sepia tea-stained look to a lot of shots. And that's supposed to blend into the real-world photography at the time. I think that's just some serious...
pretty cool.
There's some brownie points for me. Because at this time, again, even later in the history of the West, there are actual pictures of Butch Cassidy. So,
we're here, because it's early 1900s, absolutely.
Exactly. Yeah. And that, once again, is where I enjoy the blend of legend and history with it. And I think this film definitely has a good way to acknowledge that through these tea-stained kind of look, this sepia. I actually don't know if it was called sepia back in the day.
That's what we know as it now.
Yeah, exactly. There isn't much of a score or soundtrack here. But the inclusion of modern music isn't too great. Preferably, raindrops keep falling on my head. It's just in one scene, and kind of definitely on that same note of Newman does not feel like a cowboy and outlaw. He feels like Newman on a film set, you know? So maybe folks at home, if you were a big Paul Newman fan, or even maybe curious for a first time watching of what it is, I think he gets a positive marks for me, but a little bit in conflict, which I think with how much this story really does want to be a tale of Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid. Pacing as well, I think a bit of a miss. It's really more so, there's not enough urgency sometimes. That definitely ties into my critiques of the heists are quick and dirty. You know what I mean? They're not really there to, you know, give you a lowdown. It's not heist planning. It's just kind of we see it happen.
Yeah, not too gripping.
Yeah. Thankfully, though, this chase plot that kind of comes through is really good. It keeps it moving along. It was necessary. If this was not here, I would say this is probably a much lower ranking film for me.
Okay.
That was really the saving grace.
Okay.
But without a doubt, I think this is a unique Western for its time, certainly, despite some criticism, and today, watching it. Not necessarily for its story, but a lot for filmmaking techniques and a lot of respect to the plot of these actual outlaw legends. This feels more modern than even something like Josie Wales, which is just 7 years later, and for that reason, I think it's a good watch and worth your time. We're going to go ahead and give Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid a 72.
All right, 72. You know, it's an interesting story because I don't know what I would have guessed, honestly. I didn't really have a number in mind where I thought you were going to land. But basically, were you expecting it to be better?
Yes.
Like almost maybe 80s just because of what we know this film, because we've heard about it.
Exactly.
It's
the
so
Oscar winningness of it, the sheer star power of Redford and Newman on screen.
Yeah.
You know, I was expecting a little bit
and we
more
all know
out of it.
You know, whether you've seen it or not, everyone's like, oh, Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid.
Exactly.
Absolute classic.
Exactly. And in ways, I do think it is a classic because of just how unique it is among the many, many Westerns of the time and before it. And maybe that's why it got such Oscar recognition at the time, because people saw this and say, whoa, this is not your average Western.
Right.
You know what I
mean?
Yeah,
for sure.
I feel like watching it today, it feels a little bit unfocused. But by no means is the 72 illustrating that's a bad.
No, 72 is a good movie still.
Yeah, I would say
absolutely.
well worth your time. I just feel like the 72 also illustrates that it does maybe show its age a touch, and it does fall short a tiny bit of the legend, if you will.
Very cool. Okay, so 72 for Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. We're moving on to 1986. This is our trio again. This is Jim Abrams, David Zucker, and Jerry Zucker. First we had Airplane, then we had Top Secret. Now we have Ruthless People in 86, and we dropped the exclamation point off the title.
Yeah, actually important because they're not writing here, so that exclamation point is kind of their mark, I guess.
So what do we get now with this, them directing, not writing?
Super 80s film. Wow.
Okay.
I put
We're in
this
the heart
film.
of it, yeah.
Put this film next to OG Top Gun, next to Return of the Living Dead. I mean, wow, was this like 80s? Almost to the point of like, the 80s weren't really like this. Like this is
it's oozing and dripping
propaganda.
With it.
This is they're pushing consumerism or something, you know. But it really amazing what 2 years will do to how a film feels and how that change works. I'll say this: after watching this film, I think I'm ready to not throw in the towel, but I'm ready to say Airplane was really just one of a kind. And maybe it's good, you know what I mean? I can't have these little dives into directors and writers without maybe getting a stumble every now and again.
Sure.
You know what I mean? Because I feel like the things that I've wanted to watch in this format have been, you know, successful ratings wise. This, you know, I don't know. We'll see with Naked Gun. We'll see.
It might, maybe they did
because they're back writing, you know, and yeah,
that's so true.
Yeah,
and they did make 4 Naked Guns, right?
I think
or something like absurd like that.
Yeah,
I don't know. Maybe it will be a nice surprise.
Yeah,
but what even is this? What's even the main premise of this? I'm not even sure if I'm aware of it.
So it's an over-the-top comedy. I would call it more of a normal comedy, though. We lose the slapstick, absurdist humor, and it really does feel almost like it feels like a 90s comedy, especially with Danny DeVito in this. And wow, why can't I think?
Bette Midler's the main female. Yeah,
thank you. Later on in my notes, but yeah, both were great. But it felt like so driven by those two. It felt almost very 90s to me.
Okay.
In a way. Danny DeVito is our lead here. His career is positioned between a long-time run on the show Taxi and standout movies like Twins with Schwarzenegger.
Oh, yeah,
This is where he's at in his career. He plays kind of a vile fashion tycoon that is plotting to kill his wife, Bette Midler, when she gets kidnapped by another scheming couple, and this is unknown to that couple, to Danny's delight. I enjoyed the setup. There's also a third party involved in this, that they're all trying to screw each other over. It's very scheming. If anything, it's very, it's way before Fargo, but it's kind of like a lesser version of Fargo, without the Coen brothers.
Everyone trying to get over on the other guy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's very scrounging in the dirt. Yeah. And it's really not bad in that regard, but it's totally missing any absurdity that we've seen, even in Top Secret. I wasn't too big of a fan of Top Secret.
Yeah.
But we're missing almost entirely, and I think more than anything that we'll cover, even with Naked Gun, this is definitely an outlier for this director trio. It
makes
does
sense.
not feel in their identity at all.
Makes sense if they're not the ones writing it. Because it really was the writing that made those movies. Because directing-wise, there wasn't anything like too unbelievable or
Sure. Top Secret, there was some, there was some cool sequences, like that sequence in reverse.
Yes.
I remember. But just this feels a little bit more plug and play. If I really want to be critical, it could be cutting a check. So
what exactly the jokes themselves? We're not getting a shotgun blast. Is this more like, I don't know? It's weird to say standard movie, but would you say that Airplane and Top Secret were so kind of stand out with just the onslaught of jokes, kind of?
Yes.
So is it just kind of plain Jane for that reason?
Yeah, it feels like your average actor and actress led comedy.
Like we were saying before, where
it feels, Danny DeVito and Bette Midler are the focus here, and they do a good job. I don't think it's the funniest movie. If anything, it really shows its age quite a bit.
Okay. Is it basically it's losing its absurdity? And that's what made Airplane really so good.
Absolutely.
Because, like you said, it was just the onslaught, the absurdity of it, and the constantness of it.
Yeah, and I'm comfortable to say one of a kind as well.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? As far as like how the jokes are done here, Danny and Bette really are utilizing their rated R, their R rating here to tell a lot of dirty jokes. It's a lot, obviously, around the outrageousness that he was planning to kill her and then she got kidnapped. So there's a play along aspect. Actually, come to think of it, it's like it's a proto Fargo. It's also a proto Gone Girl as well. So, I guess Ruthless People as
it all really stems from here.
Yeah, it's the shoulders. Everything is built on. But I think my problem with it is that it's so character driven on these two, and it's so much on their shoulders that the supporting cast, like Judge Reinhold or Bill Pullman, they have comedic timing. Clearly, Judge Reinhold I believe, goes on to Beverly Hills Cop not too long after this.
Okay.
I don't know. It feels like Danny and Bette got all of the best jokes in the writing, and it's not enough to hold up the whole film.
Yeah. Okay.
It's a little hard because, if anything, this is the type of movie where I don't like talking about comedies because I don't have a particular overwhelming, analysis. If I really took a scalpel to every joke, it's kind of just ruining the whole experience.
Right. No, for sure. And comedy is something that is so... It is so particular to each individual person.
Absolutely.
But in general, you can get a feel for it, for sure.
Yeah. I think in ways this film is at least a middle-of-the-road watch for me because it was a little bit of a time capsule. There is maybe a new comedy in the outrageousness of how 80s it feels.
Yeah.
So in that kind of has a new agelessness to it.
Sure.
Because that is almost a joke in itself, how wild everything looks. And again, I enjoy the performances here, but as far as Danny goes, it's kind of like just watch Matilda, and as far as Bet goes, just watch Hocus Pocus. You know what I mean? I think there's better versions of these even type of performances they're trying to do as bad people. You know,
I think that's a great note to make. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think wasn't finding anything that was actually laugh out loud for me. Not necessarily a bad film, but very dated in its style, and I don't feel it's unique enough in its comedic timing to make me recommend this above middle of the road. Another slight miss for the trio, but let's hope Naked Gun can bring it all home. We're gonna give Ruthless People a 53.
Oh wow! So just a hair above Top Secret.
Yes,
That's
very
shocking.
different, very different reasons why those two are. You know?
Okay,
I
that
think
really surprises me. Actually,
Yeah.
it almost seems like you enjoyed Top Secret more.
Yeah, I think Top Secret has more ballsiness to it, but also more bad with it. Where Ruthless People was more so like, there's nothing really bad, but there's nothing really great.
Yeah,
either.
okay.
So,
okay, yeah, so 53 for Ruthless People. We have, stay tuned for next week where we have our last...
the conclusion.
We have the conclusion, which is probably I'm now most excited for.
Right.
Okay, so like you said, you kind of watched the second Western this week because you were feeling it, and
Yes.
Johnny Depp was on the mind. So this is 1995. This is the black and white movie Dead Man, and I have not seen this, but I know certain clips from it, and I know even like a musical performance by him in it.
Oh yes. Because Neil Young is heavily featured on the score.
Right.
He's composing here.
So what do we get with Dead Man, and how does this shape up to be, a classic Western or its own kind of story?
Yeah, I mean, bottom line, I enjoyed this quite a bit. Very unique Western. I would almost call it, and this may be a turnoff for some, but an art house Western in ways. Last time we talked about Jarmusch, it was covering his film Patterson. With Dead Man, we jump back much earlier in his career, though, in the heydays of him filming segments for Coffee and Cigarettes, and as well...
this is the guy.
Yeah.
Wow.
And this is, a lot of collaboration with Tom Waits for music videos and things like that. So,
He certainly loves his black and white.
yeah, he really does. Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's with Coffee and Cigarettes.
Yeah,
It's a defining feature as well. We make a similar jump back for Johnny Depp too. This being only a few films in for him. He initially plays a man out west swindled on a job, but then the film really spirals and transforms into a character transformation for Johnny that has him slinging guns as an outlaw by the end. And I think this transformation was very enjoyable because, similar to me, I wasn't really expecting like a true Western. The film transforms in such a way that it becomes that, and it's very enjoyable for that reason.
Okay.
I thought it was really cool.
Okay. I like the sound of that.
Yeah. Like I said, it's almost art house Western. I really was not expecting it. It is a huge upside, though, because it is 100% the most unique Western I've seen in a very long time.
Wow, really?
Yeah.
Huh.
It's a little, I would say the film feels a little bit amateurish in parts. And I like to give that maybe as a preface because this is earlier in Jarmusch's career. This feels amateurish in ways where there's just quality of sets, complexity of what's on screen, what's being juggled. However, it doesn't feel amateurish in the slightest because Jarmusch is pulling from his vast amount of celebrity friends for this to have cameo appearances in here.
Okay.
And kind of one-off characters, which we'll get to in a little bit then.
And we should know that he's writing it as well.
Yes, yeah.
So this is really his baby.
Oh yeah, his baby, and I think probably that writing is so
integral to why it's also good.
It's just as defining as a Tarantino dialogue or a Coen Brothers dialogue.
Wow, he's that unique. He's got that feel.
Yeah, there's it's like, I don't know. It's like conversations with an objective. These characters, the scenes they're dedicated to, they're just kind of talking, But eventually that talking leads to somewhere where the scene wants to get across. At first, and maybe if you're not used to this, or maybe at worst, folks, if you're not a fan of a Tarantino or Coen Brothers for some reason, this would feel maybe a little bit like wasted time on the screen, but it is the point of it. He's trying to have us dip our toes into side characters, and again, there's a certain level of enjoyment that these side characters are celebrities. We can just talk about it. Iggy Pop is on here.
You're so right about that coffee and cigarette. Like he likes his, like you said, his celebrity friends.
Yep.
Because Iggy Pop did a coffee and cigarettes as well.
Billy Bob Thornton is in this. We have Alfred Molina. There's actually the scene with Billy Bob and Iggy Pop are great. They play like these old West hillbillies, but Iggy Pop's wearing like a dress and he's talking about like a Roman emperor, and it's very good. It's very good. And I think part of the enjoyment, if I had to do a pitch for it, folks, though these conversations sometimes feel aimless in this film, it's fun seeing how it snaps into the plot, and how it then takes a turn and kind of readjusts its trajectory to get us back on track for it, even if it seems like a side aspect.
Yeah,
there.
so for a second there, you're watching the film and you're like, this is really getting away from itself almost. Okay.
But it does snap back.
Right, it's purposeful.
Exactly.
Yeah,
that really is his style. So definitely one of the most defining features of this film is the score being composed, and I really mean composed, by Neil Young. These are not featuring his songs, not a single song. It is him composing over what I would imagine, is the actual film footage, and he's just playing guitar and having not like an orchestra, but a band behind him in the studio. I straight up love it. It was so cool.
And is it westerny?
Yeah.
Does it take cues?
It definitely feels just like Neil Young on his electric guitar. Yeah, I don't feel like there's any kind of I don't know. I could be wrong.
It doesn't feel themed at all.
No. It feels very much like Neil Young had a Western score pushed through him, But it's a cool project for him because it's such a prevalent electric guitar feel. You get a Morricone, spaghetti Western feel to it, but still having its own identity.
Yeah. And most importantly, you say it definitely fits.
Yes.
It fits in the setting. It fits with the scenes.
Yes.
Okay, all right.
And there's this film, like I said, around maybe some of the more amateurish elements. The film is very pure in just trying to achieve some badassery in the Western setting. And I think this is, the greatest on display in Neil Young's score here, because it's a badass electric guitar. It does feel Western. It does also feel like Neil Young is just doodling on his guitar sometimes, but it does create its own identity.
It works.
And, very similar to why, guitar works, or rather a guitar-driven score works in anything spaghetti Western, anything Ennio Morricone, something like that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Cool.
This
is good to hear.
Yeah.
I don't know why. I don't know. When you think Western or anything like that, even when you think of Johnny Depp films, this really kind of falls off the radar for a lot of people. And I've seen this come up multiple times, even like on Netflix or something like that over the years. And it's just like, because it wasn't talked about or well known, it's like, well, this is obviously it's not a good film.
Yeah.
So it's really this is a nice little surprise to hear.
Yeah, I think it's a cool project for Jarmusch. It's a cool project for all the actors involved and Neil Young. I mean, I think it's a very unique film for '95, and I was coming very positive with it for that reason.
Does the black and white help it, hurt it, or it doesn't affect the film, good or bad?
I would say it doesn't affect the film. It's a negative mark for me because it didn't. I don't know why it needed to be in black and white. Besides him, just like Jarmusch liking to work with black and white.
Right.
But I would say nothing of substance, and I was definitely looking to see if there was any kind of substance. I mean, maybe there is, because there are some sets that are very simple. I wouldn't say budget, but again, it's not like
bit smaller scale.
Yeah, you don't feel a lot of money behind this production.
Okay, sure.
Maybe the black and white was also used to kind of create some cohesion. If maybe in color would show some ugly spots to the production. Potentially.
I don't know. Maybe, and obviously we're just here to watch the films.
Sure.
But if we went into Jim Jarmusch a little bit, maybe we would learn that because he also does it with coffee and cigarettes, there are just guys, especially closer to back then, that love black and white more.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it was a big proponent of, especially when it comes to Westerns, a lot of those old school Western guys really did not like color being introduced.
Oh, yes.
Even for shadow work, for just the picture itself. Maybe he loves black and white.
Sure. And I think you bring up a great point, because maybe that in itself is all you need to be crafting a Western, that it's a nod to an older style of film, an older story of a film, or story structure to a film.
Right.
So I would say this film gets very positive marks for me, though, because Jarmusch's writing style is on great display here. If I had to choose a pocket example over Coffee and Cigarettes, this would be my go-to for his writing style. It's very conversational. It's kind of comedic as well, because naturally people will be talking and there'll be some jabs in there, or there'll just be some light jokes in there. Yeah.
It's witty dialogue, yes. Yeah.
I don't really know what his writing style would be called. I would call it, again, conversations with an objective, maybe sketch conversations, if I wanted to give it a label unique to the podcast. It features just such wild characters. Again, we go back to the segments of, very Tarantino, very Coen Brothers, that we get these bit roles out of nowhere. But, despite Jarmusch not being on that level even in 95, or maybe especially in 95, he still is able to pull some star power with who his friends are, or these connections. Yeah. So, again, Billy Bob Thornton and Iggy Pop came out of nowhere, and really is a very enjoyable part. I mean, it's outlandish, but they're these psychotic hillbillies, and it's just great. But I would say where this film is maybe a little bit cut, and honestly has been a theme for nearly every Western that we covered on the podcast, is just a little bit of pacing. I think this film, no doubt, would be in the 80s if it was cut to an hour and 40.
Wow.
I think it just...
And it's about 2 hours and 1 minute. So
yeah. It just needs a touch bit of fat to trim. And if anything, just to illustrate this a little bit better, as much as I loved Neil Young's score, if anything, that even overstays its welcome a little bit, because we hear kind of repeat...
It's overused.
Yeah, electric guitar doodles or motifs, if you really want to be fancy with his composing. The whole film has just a little bit of fat on it. And I think, man, if it was just cut down slightly ever so much, I mean, obviously some of that does play into these side conversations and these side characters. What's there is so enjoyable because, again, this film has one objective, and that is being a badass Western, and it's really enjoyable. I loved it.
It's very surprising to hear.
Yeah.
In a great way, yeah.
Exactly, especially for how art house it is. You know what I mean? There is almost there's just something to it that you can feel.
It feels like an A24 production almost?
Maybe not A24, but A24 meets... there's just an emphasis on showing this transformation and having a fun gun-tootin' time in the West. And there's a certain purity that comes with that simplicity, I could really look at this film and say, oh, this is very amateurish, but I think there is a certain purity that comes with that there. Something absolutely worth your time. And I would say, fat to trim or not, it is something that I want to give a solid recommendation for. The critical thinking for me this week, and maybe the crisis I was having, is, do I enjoy this film more than the legendary Butch Cassidy?
So true.
So I was like, oh my God, what are we doing here? Oh boy. But I think both films, oddly enough, it was a unique pairing, and again, totally by accident. Both films show their age quite a bit, but where I could compare the structure and characters of Butch Cassidy to a lot of different peers, not necessarily in style, but in the roles and the characters themselves, I think this film stands alone with itself. We're going to go ahead and give Dead Man a 75.
I can't believe that. Wow, okay. Man, a 75 for this film? I am more than shocked.
Yeah,
I really am. I'm really more than shocked. And
both very good Westerns, and...
Honestly, it's great to hear that this... I don't know, I feel like we have to watch more Jim Jarmusch now.
Yeah, I mean, he doesn't have too much.
That's
a lot
crazy.
Of sketch, a lot of music videos, if anything.
I think we should... Yeah, we mentioned Coffee and Cigarettes so many times. Mm-hmm. Coffee and Cigarettes are little vignettes almost.
Yes.
They're little 5 to 10 minute segments where, how would you describe it? I would say two kind of unlikely people that maybe wouldn't naturally cross paths sit down,
have a conversation,
and usually in a diner or something like that.
Yeah,
and it's black and white, and
it very much blurs the line between is this a script or is this not?
And it's witty, it's just straight dialogue. So if anybody go and check that out, Coffee
Absolutely.
and Cigarettes.
And again, like I said, if you want more of a story structure and a unique Western with his writing style, this is a great pocket example of that. I really would point to this almost over Coffee and Cigarettes because you get an actual story, if you will.
It could be a good precursor to who this guy is, though.
Sure.
The writer, Jim Jarmusch and everything like that. Man, this is now 3 Westerns we've done that are really quite different Westerns, but
yes.
You're enjoying them for the most part. With Jesse James, with this, and even with Butch Cassidy as well, yeah.
Absolutely. And I think that's what's been enjoyable this month because where maybe some of my preference for sci-fis over Westerns, if you will, comes from is that it's predictable stories or predictable elements, kind of been there, done that stuff. And I cannot really say that for...
Yeah, these are very much Westerns, all with their own unique flavor.
Absolutely. Yeah. Almost genre-bending flavor to it.
And honestly, I think, if people are going to forget about Butch Cassidy or something like that with the 72 compared to Dead Man with 75, it's so important to say, this is in the here and now. You're not watching this film for the first time back when it was made. And it's really, how do these films hold up?
Yeah.
And I think that these scores are representative of that, especially with the way you're talking about them.
Yeah, and just as a last note, if I could stress anything, believe me, allow me to definitely emphasize that this film feels just as dated for being a 95 film as Butch Cassidy felt like being a late 60s film.
Right.
And I'm taking both into that kind of consideration for that as well. So
awesome. Well, I love it. And a great surprise. I can't wait to watch it. Dead Man with a 75%. That's great to hear, Vin.
So far, the highest ranking Western. And it wasn't even on the initial plan.
That's right. It was just like, all right, we'll watch this one. All right, Vin. That's awesome. Now we have 2 more films coming up that are new release now in theaters. But before that, we're going to go ahead and do our producer segment here, and we're going to remind everybody that we're all the value for value system. And we do have a producer this week, and we want to give a shout out and a thank you to Luke Gehman.
Oh!
And Luke, you are the producer of this episode and the producer in general of the Daily Ratings podcast. We want to thank Luke. And he wrote in a small note here, he said, "You guys make my commute to work such a joy. I've seen so many fantastic new movies because of y'all. Keep it up."
Oh, wow. Thank you so much,
Yeah, which is great. And Luke, we're happy that you're enjoying it. And we should note that he gave a Space Odyssey donation, which is our first Space Odyssey, which is basically 2001 pennies. So it's $20.01. And it's the Space Odyssey donation.
We'll make sure to cash it out in pennies.
Yeah. But that's awesome. Thank you for the Space Odyssey donation, Luke. And we thank you for the note that you wrote in as well. Thank you so much for producing the Daily Ratings.
Absolutely. And glad to hear that, especially something mundane as a commute or something like that, if you get an enjoyment out of it. Certainly if you're watching new movies, very happy to hear.
That's great. And that's so great to hear that we tackle something and people enjoy, they listen to it on Wednesday morning to the way to work, when this comes out, and then, they're watching the movie in that week as well. So that's awesome, Luke. We thank you. Thank you for being with us. Thanks for producing. And for folks at home, what this is, this is obviously our producer segment. We go off the value for value model. We are completely producer supported. Do you find value in what you're hearing, what you're seeing on the website? If you could, stop by the website, go to the donations tab, and through any monetary value that you feel that you're getting, go ahead and send it our way, and we appreciate it so much. You can write in a note just like Luke did, and you could ask questions. You can make comments,
grill me,
critiques, whatever. Yeah, it could be as long. It doesn't have to be a short note here. It could be as long as you want within reason, and we're going to read it because we think your voice should be heard if you're going to take time to go ahead and produce the Daily Ratings.
And most importantly, we want to hear from you.
Big time, yeah. It is a through line to you. It is direct communication with you. We want to stay away from corporate advertising. We won't want to deal with that. We don't want to deal with tier structures or paywalls, really, much like a Patreon, exactly like that. Obviously, it's here if you want to listen to it, but really, to keep this going, because it takes so much time and a little bit of money as well, we can only do it for so long. So if you are getting value, we appreciate it if you go to thedailyratings.com and head to the donations tab. All right, and with that, Vin, we're just going to keep it going here. And we're going to move on to the 2 that are in theater.
Yes.
Now, this first film technically is a 2021 release. However, that was the Japanese release.
Yeah, there was, I think it was a release in 2021, then there was a small release in February as well. This is now finally the States release this week.
Yes, and the English dubbed version, basically.
Yes, both. Yep.
Yeah, so this is The Deer King, and what do we get with this anime, with this animation film? What is it about, and how is it?
Yeah, absolutely. So the anime studio here is Production IG. For those of you that are unfamiliar with the anime industry, this studio has, Production IG is something to always keep your eyes on. They, of course, do Ghost in the Shell, FLCL, Pat Labor, a huge amount of heavy hitters in the anime sphere.
I was just going to say, these guys are heavy hitters.
Oh, absolutely. And have been around, since, early, late 80s, early 90s, and just been killing it. Ghost in the Shell is prolific as far as anime goes. For those still clueless as far as what we did and cross paths with them on the podcast, probably has been mentioned once or twice, but the anime sequence in Kill Bill Volume 1 was done and penned by Production IG, and we also covered them in a few different sequences for the Animatrix back in the Matrix episode in December.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah, their studio did, I think, at least 2 in Animatrix.
Are those little...
yes.
Like, again, vignettes I'll use.
Yep,
Yeah.
Little short stories, anthology, and as far as Animatrix goes, they covered the Second Renaissance, which is the coolest one, It's man, it was a visual feast. Our main character here for the Deer King is Van, our typical stoic anime hero, and then Yuna, the probably most adorable baby girl in film this year. She's adorable. The story follows Van really fathering Yuna. It's a very heartwarming story amidst the outbreak of a mystical fever that is transmitted by the bite of wolves. This is a full-on fantasy. I wouldn't even really call it an adventure because it's like a fantasy... not family film, because there's definitely some serious violence, and I wouldn't necessarily show this to the youngest.
Yeah, it's
of
rated
kids.
R.
Yeah,
it's got the American rating of rated R. Yeah,
yeah. I just think there's an interesting balance for how heartwarming this story is, and trying to tell a story about fatherhood, or maybe even a second chance at fatherhood, and then just being very deep into very deep into a fantasy story and being concerned with telling a low fantasy story. Well, I'll get into a little bit of that description of what's high fantasy, low fantasy, because this is really the first time we've covered this on the podcast, this type of split. Van himself as a character seems to be some sort of war hero in exile, and this ties into a little bit of a generic plot in the B plot surrounding nations in war and, fantasy politics and whatnot, which, honestly, folks, I was ready to roll my eyes at. It really wasn't stellar or anything like that. But luckily, it's put in there. It's a little bit of sprinkling of world building, and we're back to this story about fatherhood and this plague that's going on right now. I think like I said, I would describe this as low fantasy. Just folks at home, high fantasy, that is magic, elves, mystical armor, sword in the stone type of stuff. Where low fantasy would be something more like actual medieval living conditions, little to no magic,
I really like that distinction.
Yes. Yeah.
I really like that distinction, yeah. I think that makes sense because fantasy does cast a wide net.
Yes, yeah. And this is definitely on the low side. There are spiritual elements to it, as there is almost with every anime. That's so true. But this is not concerned with, a wizard casting a fireball. This is very much a farming tale, and nations fighting over very little land. There's a low aspect to it. That I think is a good way to kind of preface this and going into this, especially with anime, because especially if you're even maybe specifically if you're not used to watching anime, you don't know what you're in for. And I think the groundedness
you could be walking
of this,
into anything. Yeah,
exactly. Ando, one of the directors here, of course, worked on Paprika, which we are a fan of on the show. A wild movie.
movie. Yeah.
But if anything, I bring it up because this is very, very grounded. And again, I think I was in love with it for trying to tell this second chance at fatherhood type of story in the midst of a fantasy environment.
Yeah. Do you think that something like this, the splitting of, you have moments of serious and maybe intense, that rated R, but then you have this heartwarming side of it. Is it so important that it's done through anime, that it really can capture something that maybe live action just couldn't do?
I think it looks phenomenal. It's tough. I mean, I don't know. I think where I was maybe thankful for this being in animation and also seeing this in the original Japanese as well, at least for my viewing of it, the child Yuna very easily could be annoying in live action, where you can tell because of the animation she is
right. Of course,
yeah. It is cutest. There's the characters being able to translate to screen better because I think of those elements, you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
For the anime fans out there, that's the Studio Ghibli tears, you know what I mean? There's something, you know, magical about it almost. What little mystical elements are there, I really do think look fantastic and are highlighted by this de-emphasis of low fantasy. Van goes through a lot of spirit visions, which visually break up the muddy, realistic tones. The wolves themselves that carry this plague have kind of a tidal wave of muck, very reminiscent of Princess Mononoke and other fantasy staples in the anime genre. The wolf fever in this also kind of takes a back seat in some spots. I really wish they would have leaned into it more, but this wolf fever seems to evoke a lot of symbolism around COVID, which I thought was, wow, interesting that we have this being tackled.
Yeah, because this was definitely all the pre-production and the writing, I'm sure, has been on for years, probably. Definitely like pre-COVID, correct?
Absolutely. And if you want to talk about the actual impact that COVID had on the Japanese animation industry, I mean, they were shocked by it. Really shook to the core as far as their production schedules and how do you work with an animation team for, you know, cell or even digital animation, you know, from home or anything like that. So
now, how was that watching now that we're post-COVID? Was it like, oh, more of this? Like, come on, I'm trying to get away from what's been going on.
Sure, that could definitely be, I think, some reaction to audiences that they say, you know, do I really need this in my fantasy? I want escapism.
Right.
You know,
yes.
I loved it because much like a sci-fi will look at a topic through a sci-fi lens, very similarly, this was taking a fantasy lens and looking at the topic.
Okay.
You know, don't get me wrong; it is still literal shadow dogs delivering this. So I'm maybe creating a little bit of a misunderstanding here.
I bet it's going to be in everybody's mind. If you're dealing with some sort of plague, sickness, illness, epidemic, it's just like it's going to be like, okay, I've seen this before in real life.
There's a certain tastefulness about it. I think it's not like they're even calling it COVID or anything like that, but there's a lot of symbolism that it's trying to create. For instance, the workers are afflicted first. Cloths are over the mouth. In obviously the replacement of masks. The wolf bites create an infection in the chest, despite where they're bitten elsewise. So.
People are going to be thinking it's just like, let's replace them with bats, and there you go. Here we are.
Exactly.
Really much of a fantasy anymore.
Bats and purple muck. You know?
But that is interesting, the similarities, even though this was pre all of that. Yeah,
I found appreciation for it because, again, you know, not even putting my own thoughts or over the narrative or anything like that. The allegory was clearly there, and I think it was refreshing for the reason of, again, I would respect it in a sci-fi, so using fantasy as a lens to tackle that. Great. And I think as well, seeing this as a wide animation release, no less something as the size of Production IG as the studio, I think no doubt this was on the mind of the production team. I mean, Japan was shocked by this, and animation industry was even more shocked to the bedrock of it. So I
just want to make a note there as well, because this has a proper wide release, correct?
Yes, now is the wide release, I believe.
Yes. But there was something that we did, and I forget the name of it, but there was another one that came out out, and you were so excited because there's a light being shown on it, and it kind of just was flapping in the wind a little bit. Barely talked about in media or anything like that. Was this? It sounds like this was scratching that itch a little bit more, or doing a better job.
And you read my mind. I mean, I have notes of how disappointed I was with Bell.
Bell, right.
And we covered that back in January. It just I'm so thankful when there's actually something decent anime wise, and again, wide release.
It's a big deal. It's a big, yeah.
I mean, there's, this is not a given, especially for anime fans, but I love it because for folks at home that specifically are not anime fans, guess what? You now have a gateway drug. You now have an entry point to this.
Yeah, that's it. Definitely.
Wide releases are important for, the development and how we consume any kind of film.
I would say it's shooting itself in the foot with being rated R.
True.
But is that gore and violence in it? Is it necessary for the film? Does it help slice the feel good enough?
It's good because I think for one, a fantasy, it needs that a little bit, especially because it's low fantasy. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. We've never used that term before, and I'm really liking it.
Yeah,
I think it's very important to make that distinction. And
I don't know if it's like a super common term, but I've definitely heard that separation.
Yeah. I like it.
And I think it's good because it creates, there's no magical creatures, there's no elves in this or anything like that.
Yeah.
So. But where I have to give credit most, and like I've hinted at already, I mean, the story's commitment to Van having this second chance at fatherhood through Yuna, it was really great. I was, as soon as they started talking about these nations and war and Van being a former soldier and whatnot, I was just like, okay, I mean, this is really, cookie cutter stuff for anime and also just film in general. But I can't stress enough, it's certainly not the best aspect. It's just sprinkling there for some world building, some context as well to the pressures that this plague is having on a larger picture. And we snap right back to what the film is about, which is this fatherhood there. And I really enjoyed it for that reason. An anime well worth your time. And I, as Tom read my mind over, I cannot tell you how disappointed I was back in January when we covered Bell. I mean, this is the first wide release anime I get to cover on the podcast with no less a great director I love, and it sucks. I mean, it was the disappointment was immense.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, this film might take a little bit of work to see in theaters, but give it a shot whenever you happen to come across it, whether that be online or in theaters for this wide release. We're going to go ahead and give The Deer King a 71.
71 is it's a very good score.
Yeah, this was a good week. Good week.
Yeah, and that's good. And would you say this is a good gateway?
I think so.
Or
because
should you start somewhere else with this production company, or
I think there's definitely better that Production IG has done.
Sure.
But I do think this is a good gateway, and I think why it maybe gets into that 70s for me is because it's not, wow, this is like anime. You know what I mean? I have to almost clock it back to like what is going to shock people to the point that they want to turn away.
Especially when you're new to anime.
Exactly.
Which I think a lot of people are, because it's almost like, oh, you're into anime and you're with it and you know what the deal is, or you're not. Or you're out of it. So it is important to get something that is a good movie for a wider audience. And it sounds like it's doing a good job at that, and very important.
Absolutely.
People have to understand that Japan's national film is an anime film.
Fireflies, yeah. And not really an anime as you would come to know it. You know what I mean? It's a very realistic story.
Sure.
So maybe in a similar way to your point, the low fantasy, the lack of magic, the lack of fantastical elements to it.
Yeah.
That is, again, I think a good starting point that you can kind of consume wonderful animations. I mean, Production IG does it no better, It's a good watch.
That's good. I'm glad that you were coming out of that positive. I'm sure for your own sake, you were just pleased.
I know.
And I think it would be great to do some anime specials, something like that too.
Yeah.
Because I think it's something that people are just nervous about. Not nervous about, but it's like people think that they're going to go and just watch a cartoon. And it's like, no, there's real good storytelling in some of these films.
Yeah, and I think there's such cross-pollination that can happen from someone that is a diehard Pixar fan and appreciates, what is done on an animation level, And
even like this, it's rated R. Sometimes, just because it's an animated film, adults have a place in the room. Sometimes it's for adults.
Absolutely.
Which is pretty cool. But awesome. That's 71 for The Deer King. We're on our last film here. I don't know. I guess I would call this the biggest film that kind of came out this week.
Big book movie.
Yes. So we're going to go ahead. This is Where the Crawdads Sing. This is directed by Olivia Newman. Mm-hmm. And what does this movie entail, and how did it work?
Yeah, so Where the Crawdads Sing is I would say romance first. This is billed as mystery thriller, but I cannot stress enough that this is romance first, and then mystery, and then thriller. I would say that romance was really key to understanding this film, and this is also a hugely popular book. This is no doubt the biggest book we have covered in 2022, or I'm sorry, biggest book movie in 2022. Maybe not for the podcast because I'm partial to Dune, but
yeah, no, definitely.
But even right, Dune is probably is nowhere near the sales of Where the Crawdads Sing.
Oh no,
yeah,
no. Dune would be way higher.
Oh, okay. Oh, good.
Yeah. No,
I would hope it's that way.
Just because we talked about it, Dune is like a lot of required reading or reading risks for schools and everything like that.
Yeah,
and just a cult following behind it.
Absolutely.
Not saying that Crawdads doesn't.
Yeah,
but
and cult following is really a great way to tune into that. In 2018, this novel was released and a hit release, and then this was further fueled by COVID restrictions in 2020, where it had its sales and readers supercharged, basically. And another 2 years later, we now get the movie to it. So,
who were the readers? Like, what was that target audience, basically?
So usually I don't dive this deep into production, but apparently it was, oh man, I forget her name, Reese Witherspoon. Reese Witherspoon on her show, a daytime talk show, featured it, and actually her production company had a play in making this film as well.
Okay.
And that's really what I think surged it into again, everyone was staying at home, so there's a lot of TV watching, but more of a housewife to young adult type of demographic of this romance
and that's
film.
Who's reading the books as well.
Exactly.
Right, that's the cult. That's that cult film. Okay.
Yeah.
Not to call him a cult, but you know what I mean.
Right. Second time around, though, with Daisy Edgar Jones this year. We covered her in Fresh back in Q1. And this, she narrates and stars as Marsh Girl. I will be calling her Marsh Girl because they call her Marsh Girl in the film, so I like that. A child abandoned by her family to grow up in the marshes of North Carolina. The time setting here is 50s, 60s. I think we catch up by late 60s. Almost her entire life is played out in flashbacks, as in the present day, a courtroom drama plays out. There is a heavy emphasis on romance in these flashbacks, so much so that I question this film being marketed as a mystery thriller at all. And my problems with the courtroom side is that it really is so inconsequential. It's like, why would I even bother calling this a mystery thriller? It's just called a romance with some spice.
Like a rom-dram, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's tough. I'm definitely not the demographic here, folks. I would say my biggest problem with the film is that these two stories blend poorly, and maybe this worked a lot better in written form. I will say I'd never read the book or anything like that. I was not caught up in the wave of that. Maybe the blending of the story played out a little bit better. I think my problem with it is that not on the romance side. It's that the courtroom scenes probably get 1/5 of the screen time in comparison to these very, very thorough flashbacks that, again, play out almost every beat of Marsh Girl's life. And when we finally get some time to dip in the courtroom scene, it plays out so super rushed and cartoonish. I mean, folks, seriously, even the slightest grasp on law will drain these scenes of any dramatic tension. It is all flash, no substance, in these courtroom scenes. And as far as that being the dramatic twist of the knife for the story, I had a problem with the whole conclusion of it. What I didn't necessarily have a problem with was the story is very concerned with just being a romance. There's a lot of chatter online that this is new Notebook, this is new Twilight. I would describe the romance as more of the maturity of Twilight. Twilight.
Okay.
Marsh Girl gets two separate love interests that kind of clash into a love triangle that is very, very predictable. I mean, it's again, I'm not the demographic here, but it reminds me, the romance of itself does not remind me of The Notebook. I think that's a misguiding aspect coming into this film, especially if you have not read the book. It reminds me of the maturity of something like a Twilight, where you have this love triangle kind of playing out very petty, but also the beat-to-beat moments of the romance on screen does not feel above surface level. It doesn't feel like it's super deep. One guy's good, the other guy's a bad guy, and Marsh Girl's got to choose between them. I mean, that's all it is. It's not
generic and
yeah.
Nothing fresh or new, that's for sure.
Where I'm like, believe me, I'm not going to die over the sword of The Notebook, but at least that's trying to tell a very arching story of,
for sure.
of true lovers. I mean, this film isn't really concerned with that. What is so generic is that all these flashbacks boil down to the threat, if you will. I mean, really, don't mean threat, but the stakes of the film of Marsh Girl choosing the wrong guy. That's all it boils down to. I mean, it's not really complex there. So, like I said, there's a lot of chatter online that this is new Notebook. I think this is far more juvenile, and it's specifically because of the romance triangle. Finally, when we get the dramatic turn of these two storylines meeting, it's just a little bit too late. And like I said, I think the courtroom drama side of this, I mean, if you understand even the slightest bit of how a courtroom works, I mean, I don't know. It's not dramatic, and by no means did I ever feel there were stakes to those scenes. So that being the destination for where the story goes, it really had me snoozing on this one.
Okay.
As far as the dramatic spin to it, then. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah. I mean, movie seems like a snoozer. It's a big old snoozer is what it seems like.
Yeah. And again, I can't stress enough. I mean, I think the particular blending of these storylines, also the descriptions of the marsh itself. The film puts emphasis on it visually, but this can be potentially much more of a standout in written form, because the same sentences that are dedicated to the romance, the same amount of real estate could be dedicated to the details of the marsh or her struggles in living in the marsh from a child to a young adult. I think there could be a lot there that could be appreciated. I think
and go deeper, or at least more interesting, or more, I don't know, maybe even more raw or something like that.
Yeah.
Did this have TV movie vibes?
Oh, for sure.
Okay,
sure.
All right.
Hallmark vibes.
Yeah. It just seems like even like the look and feel and style of the film is quite.
Yeah.
It's just not anything.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I can give some praise to the aspects of that, the filming. They're filming, I believe, down in Louisiana, but it's supposed to be like these marsh in North Carolina.
Yeah.
There is a lot of emphasis on nature and shots of nature. Marsh Girl is a studier of the marshes around her, so there is some emphasis put into how she lives and how she studies the nature around her. But again, I think in written form, I think this could be a standout and more enjoyable for a reader.
More gripping.
Yeah, hearing that detail that is being gone into about the environment she's in, where it just kind of takes a back seat. And certainly this film is concerned with, telling a hot and heavy love triangle romance.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It has a different priority, bottom line. I think something about the thoroughness as well of the flashbacks really ate up any dramatic tension to the film. And again, that's where, if anything, I can say, if you're going for a romance, this is something that you can watch. Don't go in for a thriller. Do not go in for a mystery. I was expecting some sort of,
Yeah, it's definitely billed as a mystery thriller drama.
Yeah, no. I mean, I would say it's like 1/8 that, sprinkled.
So be prepared. That's good. So people can be prepared of what they're walking into here.
Yeah, and maybe readers of the story, they understand that as well.
Sure, sure.
They understand that, if anything, the feverishness of this fan base was after the romance. Was after the stay-at-home kind of escapism that happens with that type of story.
Yeah, I wonder if the courtroom scenes were much more in depth and better though in the books. I mean, or the plot in general. Who knows? Honestly.
Yeah, I mean, this is actually a perfect example of what I hate about courtroom dramas in film. That it's just like,
Yeah.
Something will happen that is dramatic and it will be objected to, but it still plays out in the feel of the film or the feel of the scene like the jury is taking that to heart. You know what I mean? There's just like, well, no, that's not going to be the case. You know what I mean? It's not going to actually play into any actual dramatic tension of whether this, whether they're going to be guilty or not. You know what I mean? The actual outcome of the case. So
it sounds like a poopy movie.
Yeah, a little poopy. Again, I can't stress enough. I mean, I'm not anywhere close to the demographic.
Yeah, this seems like teens, tweens, and
young adult.
Young adults trying to do a rhyme, but it doesn't. Yeah.
Teens, tweens, and
mama neens.
It's probably one for the fans of the film. I was not in the
clearly,
fan.
which you can kind of.
Yeah, I was in a packed theater with I mean, we want to talk about theater experiences with like kids movies. This was.
You must have been getting some looks.
Yeah, they were thinking I was going to try to pick up some moms or something like that. By the end, there was not a dry eye in the theater, folks.
Except for yours.
For mine. And mine were shut because I was sleeping. No, I'm joking. I wouldn't do it.
That's funny. The joys of going to see on the opening night.
Yeah. Packed, folks. It was.
You felt more connected to the kids in Minions and Lightyear than you did these women in Crawdads.
That is true. There was a disconnect there. Absolutely, for your good point.
That's funny.
Yeah, folks. As much as we like to bash Rotten Tomatoes, I think the story really plays out with this one. At the time of writing my review, Rotten Tomato had a 33 critic score. And a 93 audience score, which I think illustrates, again, this is a movie for the readers, not a movie for movies.
Yes, and of course, as we know, everyone loves movie scores that move constantly.
What's the update?
They're still close, but they are different. So the critic score is 36,
okay,
and the audience is 96. Oh, it's even higher.
So they both bumped 3. Wow.
So yeah, I think that's a great. I think it's important for people to listen to this before going to see it.
Yeah.
Understand that. I mean, if you're not a fan of the books,
sure,
beware.
I've actually talked to some people that have read the book. I said I was going to watch it. They go, "Have you read the book?" I go, "No." They go, "Are you sure you want to watch it?" So, you know what I mean?
So maybe if you're going with your girlfriend, maybe you go to any other movie and she can go enjoy this film.
Exactly, yeah. And I think, if anything, there is a...
Go see Maverick, it's still out.
Oh, yeah, Maverick. Maverick will be evergreen in theaters until 2024. But there is a certain story that is told in that disparagement between scores of critics and audiences. I think for those, the 97% female theater that I was in, who clearly were day one fans, who clearly were fanatical about this book, they clearly loved it, to the point of tears. Yeah. So there is a little bit of a half step I want in my criticism. By no means do I think this is a great movie, but I think also a 33 or a 36 is a little rough as well. By no means do I think it's that bad.
It's not failing that much as a film. Okay,
that's a good. I think if anything, that's very dramatic. It's if you were one of the many that this book grabbed a hold of, this might be a recommendation for the the vivid descriptions of Marsh and Marsh Girl come to life. But for everyone else, I would say this is probably a pass. We're going to go ahead and give Where the Crawdads Sing a 42.
42%, okay. Yeah, like you said, maybe in the 30s was a little bit too harsh, but...
Yeah, I think that's very, very dramatic. It is a functioning film. It is a generic...
And probably is only for 42% of the audience.
Yeah.
If we have 50 men, 50 women, not all women are going to love this either.
Sure,
You know what I mean? Maybe 42% is very representative. Were you getting any looks like... Was it just you and just like the boyfriends or husbands in the theater?
I chose the very back of the theater, the back corner of the theater.
So you really look like a creep. Sitting there by yourself watching this movie.
No, I had my hat on and everything. The hair wasn't done. I was not looking the best, folks. I was not picking up anyone.
Oh, that's funny. That's funny.
Emotions running high or not.
42. Okay, so 42% for Where the Crawdads Sing. And, okay, so Vin, looking at these films here, is there anything you'd like to add? This is like a bit of an array that we had, definitely.
Yeah,
we had a taste of a lot of different stuff.
Yeah, an enjoyable week, though. And
Even the Westerns, 2 different Westerns, really.
Yeah, I was really excited to talk about all these films. There was a lot I had to say. So, but no, nothing else. I'm excited to conclude the Westerns next week, and I'm excited to conclude the Zucker Abrams project as well.
Oh yeah, definitely. So stay tuned next week, folks, and I just want to make a note as well. So just like, Vin has been making that comment lately, and I don't even know if you realized it, but you have been enjoying talking about these films, excited to talk about these films even though not liking.
Yeah, despite bad movies.
And it's right. And it's 5 films a week. It is a lot of time, folks. And that's the thing. We are enjoying it right now. And we are new, so obviously we don't have a lot of producers and everything like that. But, it's also how long can we keep this going? But having producers like Luke this week and things like that, it's what's going to help us keep going. So,
absolutely. Hearing from them as well. That is fuel in itself.
Major ways. So, Vin, we thank you stopping by and watching these films with the scores. And, folks, we'll run it down one more time here. We have Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid with a 72%. Ruthless People with a 53, Dead Man with a 75, The Deer King with a 71, and Where the Crawdads Sing with a 42%. And folks, we thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next week on the Daily Ratings Podcast. If you enjoyed the podcast, if you would, give us a good rating, or tell a friend about us. If you're wondering if a film is worth a watch, or just like to see more movie ratings from Vince, be sure to stop by thedailyratings.com, where we have our ever-expanding catalog of films. Also, if you found value in the podcast or our site, become a producer, and go to the donations tab on thedailyratings.com. You can donate whatever amount of value you feel you received from us. We're looking to build this into something large and great, but also be independent from those corporate sponsors. So we greatly appreciate any support from you all. So thanks so much, and we'll see you next time on the Daily Ratings Podcast.